very much. And welcome to the first of our Governance Health Check Wednesdays, brought to you by the Development Governance Group. My name is Denise Copeland, Governance and Charity Advice Manager in NICFA, and I provide secretariat to the Development Governance Group. And I'd like to introduce you to two fellow members of the Development Governance Group who will be delivering the presentation this evening. So we have Claire O'Hare, who is Membership Support Officer with Youth Work Alliance, and Richard Honeyford, Executive Manager with the Northern Ireland Sports Forum. And Richard and Claire will be leading us through the presentation, giving you plenty of tips on how to review your governance from here on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Denise. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And again, yes, thanks for sorting that minor glitch out. So first of all, pleasure to be here, and you're all very welcome. And I think it's great to see so many people from I think different sectors across voluntary and community sectors. So my name's Richard Honeyford. I'm the Executive Manager at the Northern Ireland Sports Forum. So I have the delight of introducing the key aspects of this evening's workshop. So before we really get into nitty-gritty on Principle 1 and the health check, I just want to give a little bit of background about the Code of Good Governance and really how it came about. So the code for the voluntary and community sector in NI was first produced by the Developing Governance Group back in 2008. It was formed as a specific mandate to develop some standards for governance for the sector. So it really was a code for the sector and by the sector. So organizations wanted some guidance to clarify what the main principles of governance are, so it could help them in their decision-making, their accountability, and essentially the work of their boards or committees. So currently represented on the group are 12 voluntary and community sector organizations, with 2 new members joined in the last few years. And all of the members of the group have a particular governance focus within their membership or subsector. So really trying to bring together expertise and knowing what the different sectors looks like and what the needs are. So I'm sure you'll recognize most of these, including Advice NI, Youth Work Alliance, Claire's with us tonight, and ourselves, the NI Sports Forum. But above all, just to note that the joint secretariats, NICFA and Volunteer Now. So just look into the 5 key principles of governance. So the Code of Good Governance is now in its 3rd edition, and that was launched in 2021. So it's been revised a couple of times. So it sets out the principles and the key elements of good governance in an organization as a whole, and as well as recommended practice. So it is closely linked to the regulatory responsibilities, but it's really important to say, I think at the start, that the standards are for governance practice. So this isn't mandatory, but it has also been endorsed by and recognized really by the Charity Commission NI. So there's 5 key principles. So understanding your board, understanding its function, delivering organizational purpose, working as an effective team, maintaining control, making effective decisions and managing risks, acting with integrity, and being open and accountable. So today we're looking at Principle 1 for boards and committees and understanding its function in delivering organizational purpose. So who's the Code of Good Governance for? So it's really for all organizations in the voluntary and community sector. So that could be charities, not-for-profit organizations, sports and faith organizations. So it's applicable to anybody that runs or governs a particular group or sector. Before we get into the nitty-gritty later on, it's really maybe to clarify some of the terms. So the Charity Commission refers to the governing body of a charity as the charity trustees. So you could have several names for your governing bodies. You can see them here: committee, directors, governors, elders, council, and so on. But it is worth highlighting that in the Code of Good Governance, we refer to the board as the generic term for that governing body. And we also use the term board in the governance health check. But when we refer to the DIY committee guide, so the online website, we use the term board and management committee also in there as well. So just to point that out and clarify those that we would use them interchangeably, and obviously different organizations maybe refer to them in slightly different ways. So that's just a little bit of background to get us started, and I'm just going to pass to Claire now to look at the resources and support for the code.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon, everybody. In terms of, well, as you know, all board members hold a position of trust, and that position of trust comes with legal and moral responsibilities. So the code is essentially, and its accompanying resources, are designed to support you to meet those responsibilities and to meet the needs and expectations of your beneficiaries, whoever they may be, your funders and others. So supporting resources include, if you can have, thank you. We have a boardroom poster, which you can place in the room that you normally meet as a board. And this serves as a kind of shared reminder to everyone of your obligations as board members. The code's also available in a handy booklet format. So this is the booklet in terms of size. And the booklet sets out the 5 principles, and it breaks these down further into supporting principles, just to give you a little bit more clarity. And it offers at the beginning further information on how to actually use the code. And you can access hard copies, these hard copies of the code for your board from any of the listed Developing Governance Group member organisations. The health check in particular then is an opportunity to review your current systems and processes and understand where they might be falling short. And it will help you to identify and mitigate against risk. It offers you protection as individuals and as a collective, and protects you and your services where you do take action. We've identified potentially shortfalls and take action. And it also will increase stakeholder confidence, where you can demonstrate to funders and others that you're actively working towards meeting the standards that are set out in the code. So to support you in your journey to good governance, the DIY committee website then offers a host of guidance and downloadable resources, and we're going to be looking at some of those with you today. So you can either click on the link, we'll be sending out slides for this, so you can either click on the link to access the code, or you could use the QR code. And the committee, it's the DIY committee website itself, all of the guidance and sample documents provided through this are actually mapped to the 5 principles of the code for easy navigation. So then just looking at the health check it's essentially a self-assessment tool, and it's designed for boards of all shapes and sizes to use to review their current governance systems and practice against the code, and to use it to identify areas where you might want to improve on. So it's laid out as a questionnaire, and it enables you to identify where on a sliding scale of fully met, partly met, and not met that you believe your organisation is in relation to meeting the code. And it does that principle by principle. And to help you understand what systems and processes are relevant to your assessment, we provide you with some suggested evidence. So there's an evidence column. Now, we appreciate that all organisations are different, your legal status, your structures, your funding, your people, your assets. So what constitutes good governance for one organisation isn't necessarily the same for all organisations. So proportionality and common sense are key to this process. And we will talk you through some of that in some of the examples that we're going to look at in a moment. And alongside the fully met and partially met or not met column is a space within the document, which allows you to set out your evidence. So if you decide, for example, when you read one of the questions that you think maybe we fully met that, you can actually set out, well, what evidence do you have to back up that assessment? And in some instances, as part of a discussion, you can quite easily dismiss a question and say, oh yeah, we fully met that. We know we have that. But then when you actually have to sit and write something as part of your evidence, it can cause you to pause and question again, well, actually, does that really meet or fully meet that question? But most important of all, when you're completing the health check, we strongly suggest that you allow sufficient time in the first place to complete the assessment, but also that you complete it honestly. And that is really critical. It's an internal document. Nobody can ask you for it. A funder, you can publicise that you are on the journey to good governance and that you're actively on that journey, but nobody is going to ask you for this document. So it's to your benefit to be as honest and thorough as possible when you're going through the process. And if we could move to the next slide. Okay, this is an image. I just like this image, but I think it offers us a really good visual representation of where we'd all like to be in terms of our own organisations, because strong foundations are built on sound governance systems and practice, and with sound systems and practice, that will leave your organisation in a much better position to weather any coming storms. If your organisation's feeling the chill and you're a bit on the right side of that image, with possible significant not mets or partially mets in terms of good governance, but you want very much to be on the other side, bathing in sunshine and blossoms, well, I hope that you do take advantage of this opportunity to use the health check, because when the foundations aren't good, the cracks will emerge. So to get the ball rolling then on understanding just how solid your foundations are, I'm going to hand you back to Richard, and he's going to kick off with some of the examples then taken from the health check under Principle 1.
Thanks, Claire. So I think a big part of what we'd say around governance and undertaking the health check and doing these things is ultimately try not to do this all at once. And that's a reason in part that why we've looked to divide these up, to go through kind of principle by principle as to how you might do it. It is a bit of a journey, and as you can see here, we've given a bit of a roadmap of that. For me, it's a bit like the Firth of Forth Bridge. You kind of, once you've finished painting it, you kind of have to restart at the other end and look at it again. So it's something to always refer back to, something to look to do and perhaps review on an ongoing basis. So we're going to go through each of those principles, showing you just how to use the health check and the DIY Committee Guide website to adhere to the code as best you possibly can and to look towards good practice. So just as a quick reminder to remember that when we refer to the board, we use that language interchangeably. So if you're termed as a committee and so on, where we use board, we are referring to you. So there's going to be 5 online workshops over the next number of months. As I say, if you can break it up alongside these and focus on each individual principle, it really does mean that you can hone in on that each and every time. So perhaps from tonight, you might want to think about how you might implement the health check with your group, your committee, your board. But above all, do take the time to do it, and also set some deadlines so that you can maybe achieve things in bite-sized chunks. So looking more closely to Principle 1. So in terms of Principle 1, it's all about understanding the function of your organization in order to best deliver against its purpose. So it's important to reiterate that members of the board are equally responsible in law for the governance of their organization, and they're collectively responsible for ensuring the organization remains faithful to its purpose. So to understand fully what that means, we'll look to some of the key priorities under Principle 1. So we'd outlined that the board will lead by ensuring organizational purposes and rules set out in the governing document, so your articles, whatever constitution, remain relevant and valid. Setting and upholding the vision, values, and reputation of the organization, understanding and fulfilling its legal duties, ensuring the stewardship of assets, ensuring appropriate organizational structures are in place, understanding the organization's operating environment, developing and agreeing a long-term strategy, and finally reviewing and overseeing the work of the organization in the interests of its beneficiaries or members. So to help you do this, the code provides a health check. And this is really the framework of how you're going to achieve each of these aspects. So just to spend a little bit of time on this as a framework, as we're going to keep coming back to this on occasions, we're just going to use some of the examples as well this evening to try and get you to think around particular aspects of it and how you might want to approach it as well. So it is relatively self-explanatory, as Claire was saying earlier, about how it's laid out and gathering evidence. But firstly, if we look to it, it highlights the key aspects of how to meet the principle, and it frames that as a question for you to answer. So you then respond agreeing as a group, or however you do it, sort of between individuals and coming together as a group, on whether it's not met, partially met, or fully met. And then the next section really allows you to point to what you have in place to evidence this. I think, as we say, there's then some examples given, but these are only examples, and you might not explicitly have these within your organizations, but you might have something else that is in place. So that's ultimately where you start to pick that apart in terms of what you and your organization have. And ultimately, you're looking to document the aspects of what you have in place that meets that requirement or that question. So this is really designed to just identify key gaps, and then later on we're going to look to how you might set a plan to address these. So in this aspect, we've highlighted two key areas by way of an example, and something we're just going to ask you about in a little second as well. So have you reviewed your governing document in the last 3 years? And have you complied with all the governance arrangements in your governing document? So for instance, do you know the number of people needed for you to be court to make decisions in the organization? So Denise, if we can just go to the poll next. So just to get you thinking here and now a little bit, we'll try and take a minute to look to launch the poll. Is that working, Denise?
Yes, it's just coming now in a sec.
Yep. Just to check. And just on to the next slide as well when you get a chance.
Okay.
But just while that's loading, just say this is completely anonymous and just designed to be of help tonight. So please do be as honest as you can. And we're just asking 2 questions again. So have you reviewed your governing document in the last 3 years? So that could be, like I say, your articles, your constitution, whichever way you term that. And then how many people do you know, basically, how many people on your group are needed to form a quorum for a meeting? So just going to give you a bit of time to do that once it's all launched and up. That's great. So thanks for doing that, Denise. So just looking to some of the answers, reviewed your governing document in the last 3 years. So just under 70% really have reviewed that. It's fantastic. And then no, yeah, 21%. And again, don't know. It might be something to raise within your group or committee. Perhaps, you know, it might be individuals who've just come along. Maybe you've just joined the organization, so you wouldn't be aware. But again, might be something you wish to raise going forward. But great to see actually a good number of people have, because it can be a bit of an undertaking at times. So how many people does your group need for a quorum? Yep, 3, quite a few are 4, 5 or more is about 30%, so 4, 43%. So I could say for ourselves in the sports forum, I know ours is 4 because I always have to go back and check and recheck as depending what the meetings look like. So We do find that something that comes up regularly, just handy to have to hand to make sure that you do have the right number of people there if you're making a decision or something that needs to be voted on within that. So that was just something to break that up slightly. And just to get you thinking, like I say, how you might want to approach each of those questions and engage with your group, your committee around that all. So I'm just going to pass back to Claire now, who's going to talk a bit more about reviewing your policies and using the site to help you do that as well.
Thank you, Richard. So yes, just under Principle 1, one of the other questions then that we've highlighted is, have you reviewed your organisation's policies as appropriate and as required? So just before we take this further, I want to break that down because there is a rationale for including both as appropriate and as required. So as appropriate can mean in line with planned policy review timelines. So for example, the board will decide how regularly, excuse me, apologies. The board will decide how regularly a policy should be reviewed, and that might be every 2 years, it could be every 3 years, or it could be a different time frame depending on the actual policy. And that's assuming that your board or committee does that at this point. The as required aspect then, on the other hand, might be in response to needs identified within the organisation, or it could be externally driven in line with, for example, changes in legislation. So there might be some policies that you might be required to enhance your policy or your procedures to include, for example, new statutory rights for employees. So that's driven kind of time-wise by external pressures. So one way that you could demonstrate that you are meeting this good governance requirement would be to keep a policy log. So what is a policy log? Well, we look to the DIY committee website as a complementary source of support for you in carrying out or undertaking the health check. And under Principle 1 within the DIY committee website, there is a policy log that you can download as a free resource. And this will be a blank template. So this is what you'll see when you go in and download the blank template, and you can make it appropriate to your needs. How you fill it out will be different for different organisations, but just to give you a sense of what you're aiming for, I've taken the liberty of populating one for you, and I'll just take you through this. So as you can see, some of the policies may have a 2-year review cycle and others maybe more. And you might not always follow the set review dates, particularly where necessity, where you are required, I suppose, necessity requires you to make changes before you actually reach your set review date. And my example here, the COVID required some additional updates to the health and safety policy for this ABC organisation. And that was before the planned review date. Other key policies should also potentially be treated this way. So, for example, maybe your safeguarding and child protection or adult protection policy should always reflect best practice and learning, and particularly as responding to learning coming from your own staff or volunteers where you have identified that procedures aren't working for some reason. So you don't wait until your next review period, you address that. So that's the as necessary. You'll always have a set planned review date to be reviewed for your policy, but you may not wait around for that one. And then normally your policy agreed dates, so the dates for review that your policy agreed dates should link to committee board meetings where you agreed the policy, where it was formally agreed by the board. And there may be where, for example, you have a circumstance where you do have to make a change, or it would be prudent to make a change to a policy, but you don't have a planned board meeting or committee meeting within the next period. Maybe it's over the summer, and you could, assuming that your governing document allows you to, you could actually make those changes by agreement via correspondence. So you could use email where a policy has gone out or a suggested change has gone out to all of the board members or committee members, and they come back to you confirming that they agree or making other suggestions. It's not the ideal way to do it for policies. Discussion of policies should take place during a board meeting or as part of a board meeting, because it's really important to have questions, to be able to put questions to the person suggesting the changes or recommending them, and have that open discussion and clear understanding from everybody of what it is you're signing up to as a board, because the board has ultimate responsibility. And I do want to say just that one of the key benefits of a policy log is not just evidence that you're actively addressing your legal responsibilities to maintain up-to-date policies and procedures, but it's also a way of mitigating against future risks. And I'll give you an example of that. So should you become involved, hopefully not, but involved in a claim against your organisation, you're able to provide clear evidence of, for example, what health and safety measures were in place at the time. So say for 6 months on or a year on, a claim comes in and somebody then suggests that you're not following your policies and procedures, but maybe you changed your policies and procedures within that period, so you can be reassured that you were following best practice as it was at that time. So there is a practical benefit to having a policy log and making sure that you're recording any changes and when they were made. Okay, so just taking a quick look then at some of the other questions in the health check. Are the board members aware of the mission, vision, and values of the organisation? Again, you'll be asking yourself if your organisation has either not met, partially met, or fully met this aspect of Principle 1. Now, not all organisations have a stated vision, mission, or values. They might simply look to, well, for the mission anyway, they might simply look to their objects or clause or their purposes in their governing document. Or they may well have developed these in the past, but they're not generally known to the current board or committee because maybe they were developed and agreed many years before. And I'm going to come back to this. I'll ask the second question, but I'll come back to both of these after we've done the poll. And the second question there is if charitable, have you checked your charity registration status with the Commission? So the poll then questions there, which will give you a minute to answer. And please, again, answer honestly, because this is completely anonymous. Do you know what mission, vision, and values are? And question 2, how many of you personally have checked the charity register on the CCNI website to see if your records are up to date? Okay, that's fantastic. 91% do know what mission, vision, and values are. I suppose the assumption is that you know what your own organisation's vision, mission, and values are, as opposed to simply what vision, mission, and values are. But if you don't, if you do need support in relation to developing vision or values, certainly the DIY Committee website provides guidance on how to do this. A fundamental role of the board is to agree and uphold the organisation's vision, values, and reputation under Principle 1. So it is important to ensure that all board members know what these are for your organisation. Certainly your values should underpin everything that you do as an organisation. So your policies, how you relate to your beneficiaries, your staff, relationships, volunteers, and how you engage with external stakeholders. So say if you need support with developing those, you'll find guidance in the DIY Committee website. And then in relation to our next one, how many of you personally have checked the register? That's again significant. 46 say yes. Choice 2 was our previous poll. I think that was don't know.
Should be no, yeah, no.
Yeah, it was no or don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
It could be a very good explanation for that high number who say no or don't know, because I know that the current there's a high number of you who are from a sports organisation or sports background, and in which case you may not be legally registered as a charity, you may be registered as a cask. So, and Richard will talk a bit about that in a minute. But absolutely, if you are a registered charity, it is the duty of all charity trustees to ensure that your organisation complies with charity legislation. So your trustee details should be up to date on the public register, and your annual monitoring return should be submitted on time, along with your annual or with your trustees' annual report, and financial information provided in the correct format and reviewed by a suitably qualified person relevant to your organisation's income, and obviously in line with the regulations. And a link actually to the Charity Commission's website has been added to the health check in the evidence column, and that's new and for your convenience. So I'm going to hand you back now to Richard.
Brilliant, Claire. Thanks for that. Just say if you do have questions as we go through this, just to remind you you can put those in the chat, and we will have an opportunity to look at those towards the end as well, if there's anything specific that maybe crops up. So this bit really just looking through about the role of the board or the management committee. So within the health check, it asks about clearly defining the role of the board, and really how the board or committee members is described may vary according to, I suppose, the nature, maybe the size of the organization. But essentially, all your committee members are really committing to, upholding the values, the objectives of the organization, thinking about giving adequate time and energy to being a trustee. So are they really going to commit to the organization and do what is required? But above all, I think it's really acting with integrity, and to make sure that you're avoiding the likes of personal conflicts or conflicts of interest as well. So the management committee members really should have access to all the information to support them in carrying out their responsibilities, and this would come into this part of looking through the role of the board or the management committee. So if we take the example here is some of the suggested evidence is about written role descriptions and induction packs. So often people can join a board or committee maybe without a full role description, and it's really important to ensure that that's in place. I think an awful lot of the time, perhaps there's one for those officer type roles. So the likes of treasurer, chair, president can often be in place, but also to think about, the general director, trustees role. And again, these don't need to be pages and pages, and just as long as it's simple and honest for people to assess if it's either a board they want to join or if it reflects the role that they're currently doing. And it's also good practice to really have an induction pack to highlight the expectations. So again, around that commitment, how many times do you meet a year? Is it 4, 6, 8 times in a year, monthly? Are there other commitments that maybe you would be expected to go to, or perhaps they're an opportunity for that person as well? So the kind of events or things that the organization really runs that you might see of benefit. And again, there's help here on the DIY Committee Guide website. So looking at those roles and responsibilities of management committee members. So this is really designed to highlight signposts and help you in these, because I think quite often back to that kind of role description versus job description, people kind of feel they don't want it to come across as a job, but it's really important to have these things listed down so people understand what that role is and what the organization's trying to achieve. So this page is there. Within that principle 1, go down, you'll find that rules and responsibilities page on the website, and that will help give you some templates so around those role descriptions, which is brilliantly pointed out by an arrow here. But what we would say is, really some people I think can be afraid in terms of culturally, it's maybe being people are invited on to join a board and so on. But don't be afraid that you're going to scare people off. I think it's generally agreed it's very much better to be upfront and honest about what the role of that committee is and what the expectations are, to let someone decide if they maybe want to come put themselves forward for that role, instead of maybe having someone resign prematurely because it wasn't what they expected. And I think we all kind of know just how much that's just going to cause potentially more work in the long run. So definitely upfront and being honest around what that's going to be, what the expectations, what the commitments are. So the templates here and the guidance are designed to help you think of that. What are the skills, the qualities that are needed maybe for those roles, and also what support would be available to those individuals as they are engaged with the organization and working within the organization and supporting it. So hopefully you are maybe really starting to see where that health check interacts with the guidance. So to help you work through all of that process and go forward. So just moving on, and appreciate this section. Apologies to those who maybe aren't from the sports sector, but it does highlight to you just to ignore this one. You can remove it from the health check, but there's some particular quirks around the sports sector, which does mean that we want to have that within the health check. But if it doesn't apply, don't worry. We're going to be talking about the legal status and so on of organizations just after this. So there is something around CASCs and charity status for sports. So CASC stands for Community Amateur Sports Club, and you might sometimes see that referenced by funders in various different guises as well. So as a sports forum, we would say, just to highlight that they're so entering the CASC scheme, it's a decision that you have to really look into and don't take the decision lightly. It might not always be the best option for you as an organization, as a club. However, there is loads of benefits on the financial side of things for clubs to sign up to the CASC scheme, which is run through HMRC. So you can access gift aid and have some exemptions from tax and so on. But in terms of criteria, I would read that carefully. So some of the criteria included would be that your sport has to be recognized. So there's a list on Sport NI website. I'm happy to share that as well. I think everybody here is on that list from sports organizations. But you have to have a core purpose in the promotion of amateur sports participation and be wholly open to all sections of the community. So there's a bit more in terms of what the criteria is in terms of costs of participating and so on as well. So something to really look at. And again, as Claire said, here we will be sending this out afterwards in terms of the health check, and there's links within that for you to go through to look at the HMRC and CASC and to find the guidance on that. And quite simply, if you go onto the DIY committee website, just put CASC into the search function. There's a page for it, brief paragraph, but it will link you out to that. So we have some information just to weigh up the benefits between if you're considering being a charity or a CASC, and I'm more than happy if anybody wants to get in touch after, would be happy to share that as well. So although that's specific to sport, it does, we wanted just to highlight that, I suppose, briefly in a lot of ways, but it does also lead us then into looking at the legal structures of organizations.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So, yes, still on principle one then. Are the organizational structures appropriate for your organization? So organizational structure as such incorporates a number of things. It'll incorporate management structures in terms of your staff and volunteers, and are they appropriate and sufficient to meet the needs of your organization? So that's a question you might ask yourself as part of this. Committee structures is another one. So in terms of the board itself, any subcommittees or working groups that you currently operate, or maybe you don't have in place at this point and would help you. You could, if you don't have a specific subcommittee, You could create one to take the lead on the health check on behalf of the board, and that's an option. And then, of course, there's your legal structure itself as an organisation. So the majority of small non-profit organisations or groups in Northern Ireland are set up as associations or trusts, for example. And an association and trust, they're unincorporated in terms of their legal status. So an association operates to a constitution, a trust to a trust deed, and they don't have any independent existence in law. So it's individual members who, for constitutional purposes, are usually the committee or the board, are therefore ultimately responsible in law for liabilities incurred by the organisation. Now, a well-run organisation will have plenty of risk mitigations in place to protect the organisation and its members. And the health check of itself is a risk mitigation. So if you take yourself through the health check to identify and try and work, towards that good governance practice, and that can be a sufficient mitigation in itself and protection. But if you're an organisation with contractual obligations that are a bit more significant, maybe you have more than a few employees, you have funding contracts in place, possible service contracts, and maybe leasing arrangements, then you are more likely to benefit from incorporation as a company. And the DIY Committee website, as with everything, provides some excellent guidance for organisations around legal structure. So it looks at being unincorporated, what that means, what the pros and cons are, and similarly, it looks specifically at incorporation and gives you a sense of why that might be a more preferable legal structure for your organisation. But also with everything, there are cons as well, pros and cons. So that there would be additional responsibilities and legal obligations that come with those protections as such. So I'll hand you now back to Richard for our last example under Principle 1.
Okay, so don't want to teach your granny how to suck eggs, but I'm sure everyone's heard of strategic planning. Albeit you might refer to this slightly differently. Perhaps it's a business plan or program of activities that you might have in place. Again, whatever's relevant to the size of your organization. But either way, I think most people agree that it's really important to have a plan. And no doubt you might have looked into this. And it's really something to help decide, assess where you're at, where you want to be, and set some objectives on that journey as well. So under Principle 1, a key part of getting the fundamentals right is really looking to ensure that you have a plan in place. So just look into the health check for that. Does your organization have a written plan for what it wants to achieve? And there's also an aspect there of how you can remain sustainable. So thinking maybe around financial sustainability of the organization as well. And with lots of aspects we've covered, again, make sure that this is relevant to your organization. Things that aren't so relevant, don't look towards those as well. A strategy plan doesn't have to be 60 pages long. Keep it simple and effective, but above all, really make sure that it's agreed. Follow those principles in terms of looking towards that plan of what is going to best help your organization. So within the suggested evidence here, again, there's some examples of the different sorts of plans that you may have in place. So whatever you feel is most relevant to you and how much you think you can move towards that plan. And in terms of the website for support, there is guidance and templates here once again. So it really helps anybody who hasn't maybe gone through a strategic planning process or a business planning process. The website's really designed and the guide's designed to take you through some of those key stages of that planning process. and also ensure that it covers other elements, including operations, business planning, and so on as well. So you can really look, it's a wealth of information in there. You can download the templates, look at the guidance, and use that within your group to really see where you might want to go next in terms of putting that strategic plan in place. So that generally concludes what we want to do in terms of our looked at examples of the health check and how to link it to the DIY committee guide. And really what today was about to give you some examples of how you might maybe want to think around this, and above all, just make sure it's proportionate and relevant to your organization as well. So please do use the health check. It's a means to identify those gaps of where there's maybe areas that you are particularly strong in, you have everything in place, but really to identify those areas that might need addressed or perhaps that might need reviewed as well. And what comes next then, I'll just pass you back to Claire to look briefly that once you have that plan, you understand what that looks like, and you have identified those areas that need addressed, there's coming into the actions or setting out the actions of how you maybe want to achieve getting the right elements back in place.
Yeah, so finally then at the end of each principle of the health check, you're provided with an opportunity to identify the actions that you want to take forward under that principle. And you can set out your priority actions, agree who will do what and by when. It is important, having taken the time to assess your current systems against the code, that you keep the momentum going and you monitor your progress towards achieving that fully met target, as it were. So, you know, come back to at future meetings, come back to where are we at with that, who's responsible for moving that forward, or what do we need to put in place as a board to ensure that that is achieved. And I also want to remind you that what constitutes fully met, as Richard has said, for your organisation may not be the same for others. So it is that proportionality and common sense that goes a long way, essentially, in every aspect of good governance. So I'll just hand you quickly back then to Richard. I think we're going to look at some of your questions, maybe.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So that generally concludes our side of things. So now is really an opportunity for questions to come in.
Started now on principle 1, or should they wait to attend all 5 seminars before getting started working on the health check?
Well, absolutely. You can start now. In fact, that was going to be our next slide after this session. I was going to give you some suggestions as to how you might tackle it as a board. So yeah, we would hope that you would take the opportunity, certainly if you've signed up for all 5 principles, to take the time now between this session and the next one to tackle principle 1.
Over to you, Claire.
Are you feeling a bit like this? So naturally we have here this evening, or yeah, it is this evening now, we have a representative group here today from a range of different organizations and different boards. So I suppose we wanted to get a sense of what your immediate concerns are in taking this back to your organization, now that you have a sense of how the health check works and what other resources are available. Do you have any immediate concerns? Does anybody want to?
And again, you can direct message me in the chat, and I can read it out on your behalf if your concern maybe is a bit sensitive, or you don't want the name of the charity to be publicised, to be known.
And while we're waiting, in case anybody does want to put that into the chat, I can maybe make a suggestion that perhaps one concern might be that if you're the one taking this back to the board, that you'd be landed with the task of doing it. Well, like good governance itself, how people choose to tackle the health check really varies among different committees and boards, but critical to your success is that the process must be owned by the board. So whether you begin by asking a member of staff, if you're lucky enough to have staff, to carry out an initial assessment and maybe provide any evidence that they feel backs up their assessment, the board must be the ones to determine whether or not they're satisfied that the relevant various elements of each principle are met or not met, and if not, what needs to happen. You might want to take 30 minutes at the end of the next number of board meetings to go through the health check yourselves, or delegate the task to a subcommittee of the board in advance then of having a planned separate meeting with the whole board to consider and agree any conclusions and actions that are being recommended by the subcommittee. It is entirely up to you how you go about it. It's whatever works for your group, but you know, do it rather than not. Do we have somebody?
Yes, so a direct message. What are the risks if you find out there have been gaps in governance?
Well, it really depends on what those gaps are and how quickly you look to address those. You know, I mean, if somebody has something specific they want to put to any of us, either through NICFA, through Denise's contact, we'll come back and specifically look at something. Well, I'm happy anyway to come back and specifically look at something with you if you feel that there's a gap that you don't want to actually say what it is, but you're pretty sure it's there and you're worried about the risk that it poses to the organization. Then I'm happy to support you on a one-to-one basis with a bit of guidance around that. But really it depends, on how significant that gap is to the functioning of your organization, the type of work that you do. It's all very much based on context. I think it's hard to answer that question.
Okay. About if you're a new member onto the committee and you're doing this, is there a danger that you could be stepping on toes bringing this back?
Certainly it's of benefit to, it's protection for individual members of the committee, and it is protection for the committee as a collective. So it is only of benefit. And certainly I mean, maybe the board have done this in the past, and they could review that work, because this is why it is a kind of cyclical thing. Yes, you might get to a point where you think, right, given where we are in time and what our organization does and how it's set up at this point, we could say we're fully met, haven't fully met the code. But everything changes over time: the environment, your organization, what you do, your funding, your staffing, your skill sets. So everything requires review somewhere down the line, to ensure that all of those things that you felt were sufficient to make you fully met are still relevant. Maybe some of them aren't even needed anymore. Maybe some of them, there are some things that you dismissed previously because you didn't think they were relevant, are actually very important for you to look at now and try to develop or try to take forward. So you shouldn't feel you are equally liable as a board. Everybody has the same skin in, as it were, in the game. So you have just as much right as anybody who's been there for 10 years to you're doing them a favor. Essentially, you're doing your board a favor by bringing this back to them and suggesting that they take a bit of time to look at the organization through the health check.
And maybe offering to be the governance champion as well, Claire, perhaps.
Absolutely. That's yes.
But there's no more questions in the chat box, and I can't see any hands raised on the cameras.
Really, to summarize, I hope that we have provided you with some useful insight into how the health check supports you on your journey to good governance. and how the various complementary resources, such as the DIY committee website in particular, but things like the board poster and the code itself, all work to support you in this process. We will send you out a copy of the health check along with presentation slides, and really would encourage you to start working on Principle 1 before the next session. I hope that everybody has signed up for the next sessions. As you can see, they're taking place across this year. So there is a good 2.5 months roughly between now and the next one for you to present or have a go or kick off even a subcommittee or ask a member of staff or a volunteer to lead that process for you. But absolutely everything must come back to the board for those final decisions.